pipeline. And if you think that makes any sense, then we are just a disgrace to the American people. If you want a Keystone Pipeline, bring it to the floor, let's debate it and vote up and down. But to hold the American people that are suffering in hostage, it is just plain wrong.
Time of the gentleman's expired. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
At this time, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished woman from Illinois, Mrs. Biggert.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 3630. I appreciate the efforts of the chairman and my colleagues on relevant committees in crafting a package that responds to the needs of all Americans right now. The bill addresses the urgent struggles of the unemployed and small business owners. And it recognizes that we cannot dig our way out of a recession with more taxes and higher deficits. Whether you're a job creator or a job seeker, the bill extends critical assistance at a time that millions of Americans need it most. The bill does all this and more without adding 1 penny to the deficit. Important government reforms and cost-saving measures were included in the bill to reduce the debt and implement long overdue reforms. It's also important to note that this compromise takes steps to protect the Social Security Trust Fund. Mr. Speaker, this bill is a smart step towards job creation and economic certainty. I urge my colleagues to support this bill and yield back.
Gentlelady is expired. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
Could you indicate how much time each of us now has?
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin, has 3 3/4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp, has 3 minutes remaining.
I now yield 1 minute to our distinguished leader, the gentlelady from California.
Minority leaders recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I commend him for his extraordinary leadership on behalf of America's working families. He has demonstrated a long-term, consistent dedication to their well-being. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership. Mr. Chairman, I returned to the floor. I spoke on the rule earlier, but I listened attentively to the debate, and I think a few points need to be made, and I will do them very briefly. It is clear that the Republicans, in using the pipeline, are trying to change the subject. The subject at hand is we have a proposal from the President of the United States which has within it proposals that have had bipartisan support over a period of time on how to have a payroll tax cut that benefits many middle-income families in our country, that respects that some people are out of work through no fault of their own and need unemployment insurance, and that our seniors want to have the doctor of their choice, and that issue has to be addressed here. The fact is that because of the way the rules were set up, not to go into process, but the Republicans said, you're not even going to be able to bring the President and the Democratic proposal to the floor. Instead, we're going to bring ours to the floor. But so that the public doesn't really understand the difference between the two, we're going to have a smoke screen go out there, a smoke screen of confusion, by talking about the pipeline. And this is very interesting because this isn't about the pipeline. We, as other speakers have said, could have a vote on the pipeline at any time to vote it up or vote it down, consider what it means in jobs and impact on the environment, and it doesn't reduce dependence on foreign oil, but nonetheless, that's a subject for debate of another time. I myself have not made a public statement of one way or on the other, but many of our colleagues have. They are either supporting it or they are not, but that's not the point of the legislation. And many who support the pipeline are opposing this bill because they know it is being used. It is being used. And some of our friends in labor want this pipeline bill, but I assure you that they want unemployment insurance for workers who, again, through no fault of their own, are out of work. So let's just take a few points here. The proponents of this bill who are using the pipeline as a smokescreen and as an excuse say that it will create 20,000 jobs. Let's hope that that is correct. But what it's doing is standing in the way of the President's proposal, which will create 600,000 jobs, which will make an impact of 600,000 jobs on our economy. That's from the macroeconomic advisors. It will make the difference of 600,000 jobs. So while they're professing this 20,000 jobs, which may be a legitimate number, and let's say it's the highest number they could come up with, let's have that debate on another day. You may see a very big, strong vote on the floor for the pipeline, or you may not. So the point is 20,000 jobs, if that's the argument, versus 600,000 jobs. The other point is that the President's proposal affects 160 million Americans. 160 million Americans will have a payroll tax cut according to his proposal, and in a substantial way. This is not, as the Republicans want to do, throw a bone to the middle class. This is about a thriving middle class. It's about a payroll tax cut that does what it sets out to do, puts $1,500 in the pockets of America's families who need it, and spend it, and in doing so, inject demand into our economy, which further creates jobs. And how that is paid for is by a surtax on those making over $1 million a year. 160 million people affected, a surcharge on 300,000 of the wealthiest people in America. We don't begrudge them their wealth, their success. That's important. I don't think any one of those 300,000 people begrudge the 160 million Americans their payroll tax cut. But I do think it is the extremists in the House, on the Republican side, in the House of Representatives, who have an ideological point of view, and that is what is at work here. It isn't about those making over 300,000 begrudging the 160 million, and it isn't about the 160 million begrudging the 300,000. So let's understand the numbers here. I want to reference the Chairman's bill. Who sacrifices under the Republican ban? Seniors sacrifice $31 billion. Instead of a surcharge on the 300,000 wealthiest people in our country making over $1 million a year, the Republicans pay for their payroll tax by $31 billion from seniors. Federal workers sacrifice $40 billion. Unemployed Americans sacrifice $11 billion. Billionaires sacrifice $0. I think they're willing to do, I think all Americans are willing to do their fair share. We all have to do our part, take responsibility. $0. So again, the 20,000 jobs, 600,000 jobs. 160,000 million Americans, 300,000 Americans. $31 billion from Medicare. The President's proposal and the Democratic plan, which mirror each other, reduces the deficit by $300 billion. And according to the Congressional Budget Office, and I read from the Congressional Budget Office letter, this is to Mr. Camp, a letter from this Congressional Budget Office, the independent, nonpartisan Budget Office of the House, writing to Mr. Camp, said, according to CBO's and Joint Tax Committees, Congressional Budget Office and Joint Tax Committees estimates, enacting H.R. 3630, the bill before us, would change revenues and direct spending to produce increases in the deficit of $166.8 billion in fiscal year 2012 and $25.3 billion over the 2012-2021 period. So let's just take the lower number. $25 billion in the life of the bill. That's what the CBO says about the bill before us. It's a bill. That's why earlier today there was a motion to say that this was not in keeping with being revenue neutral, as the Republicans espouse, and we agree. So again, the numbers: 20,000 jobs, the pipeline, and that may be a good thing. this is not the place. This is a smokescreen. This is a distraction. This is change the subject. This is the masters of confusion, so you don't know what really is at stake here. You couldn't possibly be sincere about a payroll tax cut that makes the middle class thrive if you put an obstacle like that in front of it and call it a jobs bill to prevent saving or creating 600,000 jobs. 160 million Americans benefit from this. Please don't tax 300,000. Instead, take $31 billion from our seniors. Reduce the deficit by $300 billion. Increase the deficit by $25 billion. The numbers are clear. They speak for themselves. I urge my colleagues to vote no. I hope that we can come to the table and share a view that this middle-income tax cut is worth doing without obstacles to its being signed into law, and that we can do it soon. I say it over and over again. Christmas is coming. For some, the goose is getting fat. For others, there are very slim prospects. Let's change that. Let's do the people's work. Let's get this done. With that, I urge a no vote and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 30 seconds. If the distinguished minority leader had read the next paragraph of the letter to me by the Congressional Budget Office, she would have read that the bill in its entirety reduces the deficit by $1 billion. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the entirety of the letter to me from the Congressional Budget Office in the record.
Without objection.
I would also note that the first bullet on the distinguished minority leader's chart was exactly the President's proposal. The President asks to increase premiums on wealthy seniors. The President does. So it's interesting the minority leader's criticizing the President's own proposal, which is put directly into this bill.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
How much time do we have, each of us?
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin, has 2 3/4 minutes remaining. And the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp, has 2 1/2 minutes remaining.
I just plan to close. That's all the speakers we have.
I yield myself the balance of my time.
Gentleman is recognized.
I want to start by reading one of the 400+ communications we received. This is from Jackie of Amherst, New Hampshire. Unemployment, and I quote, "Unemployment benefits help me make ends meet. While I was using my savings and 401k to keep up with everything. Now they are gone. My savings are long gone. My 401k is almost gone. I am watching everything I worked so hard for my entire adult life, slip away from me. I am 50. In the name of reform, what the House Republicans are doing is to retreat from assisting the unemployed through no fault of their own. And according to the data received from the Department of Labor, 3.3 million Americans would lose weeks of unemployment benefits under this bill compared to an extension of current law. The President has made his position clear. The statement of administration policy says, the administration strongly opposes H.R. 3630. With only days left before taxes go up for 160 million hardworking Americans, H.R. 3630 plays politics at the expense of middle-class families. Instead of working together to find a balanced approach that will actually pass both houses of Congress, H.R. 3630 instead represents a choice to refight old political battles over health care and introduce ideological issues into what should be a simple debate about cutting taxes for the middle class If the President were presented with H.R. 3630, he would veto the bill. In good conscience, we should not support this bill, remembering the 3.3 million who would have their benefits cut under this bill. There should be a resounding no. A resounding no. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself the remainder of our time. This bill will strengthen our economy and help get Americans back to work by lowering the tax burden for middle-class families and job providers. It prevents massive cuts to doctors working in the Medicare program to protect American seniors and those with disabilities, providing more stability in the doctor payment schedule than there has been in a decade. It adopts 12 of the President's legislative initiatives, which represents bipartisan cooperation Americans are demanding, and includes an increase in Medicare premiums for the wealthy, as the President requested. It will extend federal unemployment programs to 5 million Americans, those still struggling after the President's failed stimulus program. I'm still waiting for the 3.5 million jobs that promised and the 6% unemployment rate. But we ensure in this bill they get the assistance they need. And under this bill, more than 1 year of benefits will be available. It's fully paid for with spending reductions, spending cuts, not job-killing tax hikes. Common sense reforms and savings in this bill includes things like actually requiring those who receive an unemployment check to look for work and get a GED if they don't have a high school diploma. Require undocumented workers who are seeking refundable, that's cash, tax credits to actually have a valid Social Security number, just like is required in the Earned Income Tax Credit. And the bill freezes pay for members of Congress and other non-military government personnel. This legislation also protects critical programs by reducing the federal tax subsidies that go to wealthier Americans. We put an end to millionaires and billionaires receiving unemployment benefits and food stamps, saving over $20 million. We also adopt the President's plan to reduce subsidies to high-income seniors by requiring them to pay a greater share of their Medicare premiums. That reduces federal spending by $31 billion. All told, this bill incorporates more than a dozen proposals the President has either offered, supported, or has signed into law in one variation or another. In fact, 90% of this bill is paid for with those policies. I urge support of this legislation. This bill is about strengthening our economy, helping Americans find a job. It doesn't add one dime to the debt. It is bipartisan, and it will help get our economy back on track. Please vote yes for this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. All time for debate on the bill has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 491, the previous question is ordered on the bill as amended. Questions on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to provide incentives for the creation of jobs and for other purposes.
What purpose, gentleman from Maryland, rise?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
Yes, I am.
The gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Order.
Gentleman from Michigan reserves a point of order. The clerk will report.
Mr. Van Hollen of Maryland moves to recommit the bill H.R. 3630 to the Committee on Ways and Means with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. Add at the end of the bill the following: Title VII, Additional Provisions, Section 701, Extension and Expansion of Payroll Tax Cut for Middle-Class Families. A. Extension. For provision extending the payroll tax cut for middle-class families, see Section 2001. B. Increased relief. 1. In general, subsection A of Section 601 of the Tax Relief, Unemployment Insurance Reauthorization and Job Creation Act of 2010, 26 U.S.C.
The bill.
Objection is heard. The clerk will continue to read.
And Job Creation Act of 2010, 26 U.S.C. 1401 note is amended. A, by inserting 9.3% for calendar year 2012 after 10.4% in paragraph 1, and B, in paragraph 2. I, by striking, including, and inserting 3.1% in the case of calendar year 2012, including after 4.2%, and double I, by striking code and inserting code. 2. Coordination with individual deduction for employment taxes. Subparagraph A of Section 601B2 of such act is amended by inserting 66.67% for taxable years which begin in 2012 after 59.6%. C. Technical amendments. Paragraph 2 of Section 601B of the Tax Relief, Unemployment Insurance Reauthorization and Job Creation Act of 2010, 26 U.S.C. 1401 note is amended. 1. By inserting of such code after 164F. 2. By inserting of such code after 1401A and subparagraph A. And 3. By inserting of such code after 1401B and subparagraph B. Section 702, extending the allowance for bonus depreciation for certain business assets. For provision extending the allowance for bonus depreciation for certain business assets, see Section 1201. Section 703, preventing a reduction in payments to doctors. For provision preventing a reduction in payment to doctors, see Section 2201. Section 704, ensuring that millionaires pay their fair share. A, in general, subchapter A of Chapter 1 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 is amended by adding at the end the following new part. Part 13, Part 8, surtax on millionaires. Section 59B, surtax on millionaires. Section 59B, surtax on millionaires. A, general rule. In the case of a taxpayer other than a corporation for any taxable year beginning after 2011 and before 2021, there is hereby imposed in addition to any other tax imposed by the subtitle, a tax equal to 3.6% of so much of the modified adjusted gross income of the taxpayer for such taxable year as exceeds the threshold amount. B, threshold amount. For the purposes of this section, 1, in general, the threshold amount is $1 million. 2, inflation adjustment. A, in general. In the case of any taxable year beginning after 2012, the $1 million amount under paragraph 1 shall be increased by the amount equal to I, such dollar amount multiplied by II. The cost of living adjustment determined under Section 1F3 of the calendar year in which the taxable year begins, determined by substituting calendar year 2011 for calendar year 1992 in subparagraph B thereof. B, rounding. If any amount as adjusted under paragraph 1 is not a multiple of $10,000, such amount shall be rounded to the next highest multiple of $10,000. 3, married filing separately. In the case of a married individual filing separately for any taxable year, the threshold amount shall be 1/2 of the amount otherwise in effect under this subsection for the taxable year. C, modified adjusted gross income. For purposes of this section, the term modified adjusted income means adjusted gross income reduced by any deduction not taken into account in determining adjusted gross income allowed for investment interest as defined in Section 163D. In the case of an estate or trust, adjusted gross income shall be determined as provided in Section 67E. D, special rules. 1, non-resident alien. In the case of a non-resident alien individual, only amounts taken into account in connection with the tax imposed under Section 871B shall be taken into account under this section. 2, citizens and residents living abroad. The dollar amount in effect under subsection B shall be decreased by the excess of A, the amounts excluded from the taxpayer's gross income under Section 911, over B, the amounts of any deductions or exclusions disallowed under Section 911D6 with respect to the amounts described in subparagraph A. 3, charitable trust. Subsection A shall not apply to a trust while the unexpired interests in which are devoted to one or more of the purposes described in Section 170C2B. 4, not treated as tax imposed by this chapter for certain purposes. The tax imposed under this section shall not be treated as tax imposed by this chapter for purposes of determining the amount of any credit under this chapter or for purposes of Section 55. B. Clerical amendment. The table of parts for Subchapter A of Chapter 1 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 is amended by adding at the end the following new item. Part 8, surtax on millionaires. C. Section 15 not to apply. The amendment made by subsection A shall not be treated as a change in a rate of tax for purposes of Section 15 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. D. Effective date. The amendments made by this section shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2011. Section 705, preventing insider trading by members of Congress. A. Non-public information relating to Congress and other federal employees. 1. Commodities transactions. Section 4C of the Commodity Exchange Act, 7 U.S.C. 6C, is amended by adding at the end the following. H. Non-public information relating to Congress. Not later than 270 days after the date of enactment of this subsection, the Commission shall by rule prohibit any person from buying or selling any commodity for future delivery or swap while such person is in possession of material, non-public information, as defined by the Commission, relating to any pending or prospective legislative action relating to such commodity if 1. Such information was obtained by reason of such person being a member or employee of Congress, or 2. Such information was obtained from a member or employee of Congress, and such person knows that the information was so obtained. I. Non-public information relating to other federal employees. 1. Rulemaking. Not later than 270 days after the date of enactment of this subsection, the Commission shall by rule prohibit any person from buying or selling any commodity or future delivery or swap while such person is in possession of material non-public information derived from federal employment and relating to such commodity if A. Such information was obtained by reason of such person being an employee of an agency, as such term is defined in Section 551(1) of Title V United States Code, or B. Such information was obtained from such an employee, and such person knows that the information was so obtained. 2. Material non-public information. For purposes of this subsection, the term material non-public information means any information that an employee of an agency, as such term is defined in Section 551(1) of Title V United States Code, gains by reason of federal employment, and that such employee knows or should know has not been made available to the general public, including information that A. is routinely exempt from disclosure under Section 552 of Title V United States Code, or otherwise protected from disclosure by statute, executive order, or regulation. B. is designated as confidential by an agency, or C. has not actually been disseminated to the general public and is not authorized to be made available to the public on request. 2. Securities transaction. Section 10 of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 is amended by adding at the end the following. D. Non-public information relating to Congress. Not later than 270 days after the date of enactment of this subsection, the Commission shall by rule prohibit any person from buying or selling the securities or security-based swaps of any issuer while such person is in possession of material, non-public information, as defined by the Commission, relating to any pending or prospective legislative action relating to such issuer if 1. Such information was obtained by reason of such person being a member or employee of Congress, or 2. Such information was obtained from a member or employee of Congress, and such person knows that the information was so obtained. E. Non-public information relating to other federal employees. 1. Rulemaking. Not later than 270 days after the date of enactment of this subsection, the Commission shall by rule prohibit any person from buying or selling the securities or security-based swaps of any issuer where such person is in possession of material non-public information derived from federal employment and relating to such issuer if a. such information was obtained by reason of such person being an employee of an agency, as such term is defined in Section 551(1) of Title V United States Code, or b. such information was obtained from such an employee and such person knows that the information was so obtained. 2. Material non-public information. For purposes of this subsection, the term material non-public information means any information that an employee of an agency, as such term is defined in Section 551(1) of Title V United States Code, gains by reason of federal employment and that such employee knows or should know has not been made available to the general public, including information that a. is routinely exempt from disclosure under Section 552 of Title V United States Code, or otherwise protected from disclosure by statute, executive order, or regulation. B. is designated as confidential by any agency, or C. has not actually been disseminated to the general public and is not authorized to be made available to the public on request. B. Committee hearings on the implementation. 1. In general, the Committee on Agriculture of the House of Representatives shall hold a hearing on the implementation by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission of subsections H and I of Section 4C of the Commodity Exchange Act as added by subsection A2 of this section, and the Committee on Financial Services of the House of Representatives shall hold a hearing on the implementation by the Securities Exchange Commission of subsections D and E of Section 10 of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 as added by subsection A1 of this section. 2. Exercise of rulemaking authority. Paragraph 1 is enacted. A. As an exercise of the rulemaking power of the House of Representatives and as such shall be considered as part of the rules of the House, and such rule shall supersede any other rule of the House only to the extent that rule is inconsistent therewith. And B, with full recognition of the constitutional right of the House to have changed such rules so far as relating to the procedure in the House at any time in the same manner and to the same extent as in the case of any other rule of the House. C, timely reporting of financial transactions. 1. Reporting requirement. Section 103 of the Ethics in Government Act of 1978 is amended by adding at the end the following subsection. 1. Within 90 days after the purchase, sale, or exchange of any stocks, bonds, commodities, future, or other forms of securities that are otherwise required to be reported under this Act and the transaction of which involves at least $1,000 by any member of Congress or official or employee of the legislative branch required to so file, that member, officer, or employee shall file a report of that transaction with the Clerk of the House of Representatives in the case of a representative in Congress, a delegate to Congress, or the resident commissioner from Puerto Rico, or with the Secretary of the Senate in the case of a senator. 2. Effective date. The amendment made by paragraph 1 shall apply to transactions occurring on or after the date that is 90 days after the date of enactment of this Act. D. Disclosure of political intelligence activities under Lobbying Disclosure Act. 1. Definitions. Section 3 of the Lobbying Disclosure Act of 1995, 2 U.S.C. 1602 is amended. A. In paragraph 2, I. By inserting after lobbying activities each place that term appears the following, or political intelligence activities, and double I. By inserting after lobbyists the following, or political intelligence consultants, and B. By adding at the end the following new paragraphs. 17. Political intelligence activities. The term political intelligence activities means political intelligence contacts and efforts in support of such contacts, including preparation and planning activities, research, and other background work that is intended at the time it is performed for use in contacts and coordination with such contacts and efforts of others. 18. Political intelligence contact. A, definition. The term political intelligence contact means any oral or written communication, including an electronic communication, to or from a covered executive branch official or a covered legislative branch official, the information derived from which is intended for the use in analyzing securities or commodities markets or in informing investment decisions, and which is made on behalf of a client with regard to I, the formulation, modification, or adoption of federal legislation, including legislative proposals. II, the formulation, modification, or adoption of a federal rule, regulation, executive order, or any other program, policy, or position of the United States government. Or III, the administration or execution of a federal program or policy, including the negotiation, award, or administration of a federal contract, grant, loan, permit, or license. B, exception. The term political intelligence contact does not include a communication that is made by or to a representative of the media if the purpose of the communication is gathering or disseminating news and information to the public. 19, political intelligence firm. The term political intelligence firm means a person or entity that has one or more employees who are political intelligence consultants to a client other than that person or entity. 20, political intelligence consultant. The term political intelligence consultant means any individual who is employed or retained by a client for financial or other compensation for services that include one or more political intelligence contacts. 2, registration requirement. Section 4 of the Lobbying Disclosure Act of 1995 to U.S.C. 1603 is amended. A, in subsection A, I, in paragraph 1, I, by inserting after whichever is earlier the following, or a political intelligence consultant first makes a political intelligence contact, and 2, by inserting after such lobbyist each place the term appears the following, or consultant, II. In paragraph 2, by inserting after lobbyist each place the term appears the following, or political intelligence consultants, and III. In paragraph 3A, I. By inserting after lobbying activities each place the term appears the following, and political intelligence activities, and 2, in clause I, by inserting after lobbying firm the following, or political intelligence firm. B, in subsection B, I. In paragraph 3, by inserting after lobbying activities each place the term appears the following, or political intelligence activities. II, in paragraph 4, 1, in the matter preceding subparagraph A, by inserting after lobbying activities the following, or political intelligence activities, and 2, in subparagraph C, by inserting after lobbying activity the following, or political intelligence activity. III, in paragraph 5, by inserting after lobbying activities each place that term appears the following, or political intelligence activities. 4, in paragraph 6, by inserting after lobbyist each place the term appears the following, or political intelligence consultant. And 5, in the matter following paragraph 6, by inserting or political intelligence activities after such lobbying activities.
Mr. Speaker.
House will come to order.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading.
Is there objection? Without objection, the remainder of the motion is considered read. Members will kindly take conversations off the floor. From Michigan continues to reserve a point of order. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 5 minutes on his motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It was just a few weeks ago that our Republican colleagues in the House and the Senate said they didn't want to do any payroll tax cut for working Americans. They were opposed to any payroll tax cut for the 160 million working Americans. And at the same time, they were arguing vigorously in support of protecting tax breaks for the very wealthy in this country. They have been very clear they don't want to ask the very wealthiest to simply go back to paying the same tax rates that they were paying during the Clinton administration, a time when the economy was booming and 20 million jobs were created. They don't want to do that, but they were prepared to increase the payroll tax on 160 million working Americans. Well, they realized that that didn't sound so good to the American people. And so we are here today. And what the Republican proposal does is two things. It inserts into their bill poison pills which the President has said he will not sign. He will not sign, and they know he said that. What will the result be? It will be the same result their Republican colleagues wanted 2 weeks ago, which is no payroll tax cut for 160 million Americans. But what they could not bring themselves to do, Mr. Speaker, was pay for that payroll tax cut for 160 million by asking very wealthy people, millionaires and billionaires, to share a little bit more in the responsibility for reducing our deficit. They didn't want to do that, and so their bill cuts other people. For example, their bill would cut the pension of the folks who helped track down Osama bin Laden. Thank you very much for helping us track down Osama bin Laden. We're going to cut your pension. We're going to cut your pension from other hard-working men and women who protect this country every day in that way. Who else are we going to ask to pay for it? Well, let's ask seniors who earn $80,000 or so. Let's increase their premiums. We don't want to ask folks over $1 million to pay a little bit more, share a little bit more responsibility. Let's ask seniors at $80,000 a year. And you know what? Let's change the current unemployment compensation law from what it would be if we extended current law. Let's change it in a way where folks who are out of work through no fault of their own are looking every day for a job. Let's give them less than what they would get if we extended the current unemployment compensation. So those are all the gymnastics that bring us here today simply because the majority doesn't want to ask the folks at the very top to pay a little more. What our motion to recommit does is say we need to have shared responsibility in this country. Let's work together to bring down the deficit. We all know from independent economists that increasing the payroll tax cut will raise another 300,000 jobs. So, in fact, our motion to recommit increases that. And it also does other things to hold members of this accountable. So the choice is simple. Do we want to ask folks at the very top to help reduce our deficit and provide that payroll tax cut? And do we want to hold this body accountable on that issue? I defer to Ms. Slaughter, the Chair of the Rules Committee.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Speaker.
Ranking member.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I am going to make an offer that no one can refuse or no one should refuse.
If the gentlelady will suspend. If the gentleman from Maryland must remain on his feet in yielding time, the gentlelady may continue.
Does that come off my time?
No, ma'am.
Well, I'm pleased that the Stock Act is something we can finally vote on today in this Congress. The Stock Act has bipartisan support from 231 members of Congress, a majority of the House ranging from freshman members to senior members from both sides of the aisle. The bill has been around since 2006, and we do not need to study it another day. The critical part of the bill is the registration of the political intelligence industry. The burgeoning K Street industry gathers information from members and staff in order to enrich their Wall Street clients, and it has been completely unregulated. We will finally regulate through the Stock Act this lucrative industry and ensure that members of Congress and their staffs come to Washington to serve their constituents and not fatten their own bank accounts. There are 535 of us privileged enough to serve in this Congress, and we must hold ourselves accountable to the highest standards. And the American people have shown an incredible interest in this Stock Act. If you fail to vote for this motion today, you're going to tell them that you're not interested in their concerns. None of us on either side of the aisle want to do that. So I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of today's motion to recommit, to pass this bill that has been around for years and needs passing very badly, and to hold ourselves accountable to the American people and to the letter of the law. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman
Thank you.
the time of the gentleman from Maryland has expired.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose, gentleman from Michigan rise?
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw my reservation and seek time in opposition to the motion to recommit.
Reservation is withdrawn, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this motion to recommit is a further illustration of the glaring differences in priorities between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans have brought a plan to the floor today that is about protecting taxpayers and creating American jobs. And instead of joining us on that important task, my Democratic friends are offering yet another politically motivated motion. In fact, one senior Democratic aide recently said to the press, and I quote, "MTRs are all political." You can read it right here. My colleagues and the American people should not be fooled. They should not be distracted by these political games. Make no mistake, our bill extends the payroll tax cut for every employee in this country. And if my friends on the other side of the aisle choose to vote against it, they are supporting a tax increase on every American who collects a paycheck. This motion contains a massive 10-year tax increase. It increases taxes on employers, on small businesses, on investors, the very people we need paying more paychecks, not more taxes. In fact, this exact provision has been defeated multiple times in the U.S. Senate by Republicans and Democrats alike in a bipartisan effort. Our bill is about strengthening our economy, getting Americans back to work through common sense reforms to the unemployment insurance program. It will ensure American seniors and disabled are protected by preventing massive cuts to doctors working in the Medicare program. And it will be paid for with fiscally responsible reforms, not job-killing tax hikes. I urge my colleagues, vote against this motion to recommit and vote for the underlying bill, and I yield back to the House all of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Gentleman from Maryland. Gentleman asks for a recorded vote. Those in support of the request will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on the motion to recommit will be followed by 5-minute votes on passage if ordered, and the motion to suspend the rules on H.R. 2767 if ordered. This is a 15-minute vote.
For most of the afternoon, the House has been debating a bill that would extend the Social Security payroll tax cut. The bill would also force the President to make a decision on the international oil pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline, within 60 days. This is a bill that also continues unemployment benefits but adds requirements for laid-off workers that seek those benefits. It blocks a pay cut for Medicare doctors and gives them a 1% increase. It's paid for by cutting parts of the new health care law. It would also freeze federal worker pay and raise fees that are charged by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Democrats have offered here a motion to recommit, a last chance to change the bill, which we understand includes language dealing with a bill on congressional insider trading. This is a 15-minute vote on the House floor. In the Senate today, they've continued a debate on two proposals that would amend the U.S. Constitution and require a balanced federal budget. You might remember this is part of the debt deal that was agreed to in August. Votes on those amendments are likely in the Senate tomorrow. On C-SPAN today, we also covered the Senate Agriculture hearing with John Corzine on the MF Global collapse, and you'll be able to see that later in our program schedule, C-SPAN 2, around 9 o'clock tonight. It's also online in the video library. Coming out of that hearing, the New York Times Deal Book reporting that one of the individuals who testified there, Terrence Duffy, the chief executive of the CME Group, the exchange that's responsible for regulating MF Global, told the committee that he has information that indicates John Corzine, the former chief executive of MF Global, knew about the missing customer money and was aware of the improper transfer of customer money. Again, that hearing later in our program schedule on C-SPAN 2, and you can also watch it online in the video library at cspan.org. Well, here on the House floor, the bill is the payroll tax cut package. Again, they're finishing up debate. Motion to recommit vote here. The White House today, at the White House briefing, spokesman Jay Carney told reporters that the White House has issued a statement of disapproval, a veto threat against the bill. Wanted to show you the spokesman's comments from earlier this afternoon.
The omnibus bill looks like it's on its way toward passage. Negotiators are having some good luck on that one. We now know that the President and Senate Democratic leadership are working to hold that one up until the payroll tax gets done. But of course, that has some peril, too. If the omnibus doesn't get done and there's no CR, then we have a government shutdown. Is the President willing to take that risk?
What the President is not willing to do is leave town or allow Congress to leave town without ensuring that 160 million Americans do not see their taxes go up next year, on average $1,000. There is ample time for Congress to finish its business and to finish America's business. They should pass a payroll tax cut extension, extension of unemployment insurance, and they can finish the spending bill all before leaving on their vacation. There's no reason that this can't be done. I'll make another point, which is that there are still issues to be resolved with the spending bill, despite some of what you've heard. There's been no bill filed. There's been no language shared. But we do know through conversations that there are issues that concern us, including outstanding issues with the funding levels to ensure that the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act can be implemented successfully. You know, the President feels very strongly that Congress should do nothing to impede the effective implementation of that very important legislation. So there are issues to resolve with the spending bill. They can be resolved. It is essential, too, that Congress act to extend the payroll tax cut and unemployment insurance. All of this can be done and still allow Congress to go on vacation.
Well, you talk about the consequences if the payroll tax isn't extended, but there are also enormous consequences for the country. We should get to the brink of a shutdown. I know you say there's time to do both, but is it responsible to even bring that into the conversation?
Well, we're not bringing that into the conversation. There is ample time to get it done. There has been substantial progress made, even though there are still issues to be resolved on the spending bill. If there is the need, come the end of the week, for Congress to pass another short-term CR, as it has done 7 times this year, then they should do that to avoid a shutdown. We don't need to get to that point, but if we do, this is certainly not an exceptional action that Congress would have to take to ensure that there is time to get the work done that it needs to get done. What Congress can't do is make vague promises. Republicans in Congress make vague promises about a payroll tax cut and then finish its business, the business that it has to get done, the spending bill, and leave town and leave the American middle class holding the bag. We're just not going to let that happen. It's not fair to the 160 million Americans who would see their taxes go up on average $1,000 next year, as we're emerging still from the worst recession since the Great Depression.
One other quick. Well, that's Jay Carney from earlier today talking about the bill that has been on the House floor much of the afternoon, the payroll tax cut package. The Associated Press writes that the payroll tax cuts approved a year ago helped stimulate the economy. They'd be extended through 2012, avoiding a loss of take-home income for 160 Americans. They also write that an expiring program of unemployment benefits for long-term jobless would remain in place. Third major component, they write, would avert a threatened 27% cut in payments to doctors who treat Medicare patients. This is a 15-minute vote. The motion to recommit vote, final passage vote, is next. Before the debate today, the GOP conference met. After that meeting early this morning, we heard from House Republican leaders who said they felt they had the votes to pass the bill today. This briefing's about 10 minutes, and we'll show you as much as we can while this vote continues.
I'd like first to announce that the new Vice Chairman of the Republican Conference is Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri, and I call on Senator Blunt to make a couple of observations, and then I'll come back and give you my thoughts. Roy.
Well, thank you, Leader. And Ron Johnson and I, two freshmen in the Senate, had a very spirited discussion with our members, but a very congenial one. I said on Tuesday of last week that there were lots of good reasons to vote for Ron Johnson, and hopefully there were a couple of good reasons to vote for me for this job, and enough of my colleagues found those couple of reasons to do that. I want to do everything I can to frankly work toward the majority, get us ready to be a majority, but also to do what we can to get our work done this year and next year. It's really important to deal with the big questions the country faces, to do that with an open mind, but also a principled direction that our conference believes in. And we're going to do what we can as a leadership, and I'm going to do what I can as an individual to be sure that we're communicating effectively with the House, that we're understanding what's possible on the House side and what we can do to help bring that to a final conclusion, hopefully this year and next year, and even more to have our conference ready for 2013 to be a Republican Senate conference in the majority with Mitch McConnell as the majority leader and working with a House of Representatives to get our work done. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity. I think this is a big defining moment for the country, and I thought one of the ways that I could help add to that debate was in the Senate leadership, and I'm glad to join as the very junior member of the 5 Republican elected leaders, and I'm going to be looking to see what the other leaders think they need to do and see what's left for me to do, and do my best to carry out those assignments. Thank you all.
Also, I know you were just dying of suspense to wonder who the new conference chair would be and who the new policy chair would be. Senator Thune and Senator Barrasso were elected to those positions unanimously, and I would also mention that there was widespread praise in our conference for the job that Senator Alexander's done by everyone. I mean, widespread praise for the good work that he's done. It seems to me that the news of the day may have just been the President's veto threat against what we expect to be a House-passed payroll tax extension bill that will also include 2 important provisions, one to maintain jobs, rolling back the EPA Boiler-Mac regulation, one to create new jobs, the Keystone Pipeline, which would employ up to 20,000 people almost immediately, just as soon as the administration signs off. Interestingly enough, I'm told by staff that the veto message omits the Keystone Pipeline as one of the reasons the President is threatening to veto this bill. We're going to have to act here before the week's out, and we are in favor of extending the payroll tax holiday for another year, in favor of extending unemployment insurance with some reforms for another period of time. But there also should be a complete package that, in addition to helping those get through these rough times, we also have provisions that save jobs and create jobs. So this has been a very balanced package put together by the House, designed to appeal to both Republicans and Democrats. The way it is paid for, much of it has been recommended by the administration itself in various talks that we've had over the past year, and we look forward to supporting the House-passed measure in the Senate and hope that our friends on the other side will find a way to join us in passing a bipartisan bill that would be good for the country. With that, let me turn to others.
Thank you. There's something that I think would be worthwhile for those of you in the media to check out. According to news reports this morning, even though the members of the Appropriation Committee tell me that the work on the appropriation bill has concluded and that it's ready to be signed, it's a conference report, so both sides have to sign that conference report before it can be considered by either body, that after meeting with the President or the White House, the Majority Leader instructed the members on his side not to sign that conference report. And ostensibly, again according to media reports, this is because that is something that, along with the defense conference report, could quickly pass the House. Presumably come to the Senate and be quickly adopted here, leaving the payroll tax extension, holiday extension and related items as potentially the last item of business for the Senate to deal with. And I gather, again, from the reports that there was concern that that would mean that the Democratic side had no leverage to try to change that House-passed payroll tax holiday extension. This is very troubling, obviously, if it's true, because it's suggesting holding hostage the continuation of the funding of our government, especially at Christmas time. I think that's not a good thing, and that would be very troubling. So perhaps that needs further looking into. It's not something that we can verify, of course, but I think it's a question that's worth your asking.
Every one of us, when we go home, have people say to us, why can't you get anything done in Washington? Why can't you come to some conclusion? Why can't you work in a bipartisan way? Well, it's very important to point out that Republicans have been working with Democrats to create an appropriations bill that we're ready to enact that would fund the government until the end of the year, end of next year. Republicans are ready to pass middle-income tax fairness and ready to do it this week. Republicans are ready to pass a defense authorization bill that will raise pay and defend our country, just as we should. And Republicans are ready to extend unemployment compensation. We're ready to do it now. So the problem seems to be down at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. The President seems to be holding it up. And if he wants an orderly end to the week, an orderly end to the year, if he wants the government-funded middle-income tax fairness and unemployment compensation, defense authorization done, well, then he needs to work with us, because we've been working together here in the Congress to get the job done.
Well, let me start by just thanking my colleagues for the opportunity to serve as conference chairman. It's very humbling to have that support. Lamar Alexander is a very, very tough act to follow. So I look forward to working with my colleagues as we try and deliver our message and talk about our agenda to the American people. And I think the main part of that is talking about what we're going to do to create jobs and grow our economy. The President talks about every morning getting up and thinking about what he can do to create jobs. He's also talked about how nice it would be to be able to get energy from a friendly and stable neighbor. If those things are true, then he ought to be for the Keystone Pipeline. But I think the President has made this issue a lot more about the election year, a lot more about politics than it is about jobs for American workers. The President needs to quit campaigning. He needs to get back and start governing and stop blocking the Keystone Pipeline. It's 20,000 jobs, immediate jobs, a $7 billion initial investment with lots of benefits to states along the way. And obviously, this project is going to get done. The only question is whether or not we benefit from it here in America and American workers benefit from it, or whether those jobs and all that investment and all that energy goes someplace else around the world. So I hope that the President will engage in this and not veto what will be a very important piece of legislation that helps create jobs for American workers.
Well, as Senator Thune said, I also want to thank my colleagues for allowing me this opportunity to work as chairman of the Republican Policy Committee and continue the good work that both Senator Kyle has done when he was chairman of that committee and Senator Thune as we continue to work on policies focused on jobs, the economy, the debt, and the spending that's happening in this country. And this job is to supply the members of the Republican conference with credible, reliable information in a timely and accurate manner, but all aimed at getting Americans back to work. And we know that under the Obama economy, he has made it worse, and we're looking for ways to make it easier and cheaper for the private sector to create jobs at a time when this administration is making it harder and more expensive for the private sector to create jobs. Okay, everybody? Yeah, take a couple of questions if there are any.
Senator Feldman, do you support the extension of the payroll tax holiday if it's not paid for?
No, we're going to pay for the package. The President is in favor of paying for it. We're in favor of paying for it, so the package is going to be paid for. The President has said it ought to be paid for. We agree with him.
Senator McConnell, are you willing to negotiate with Democrats, assuming the House bill passes this afternoon? Are you willing to then negotiate with Democrats over some of their concerns that are in the House bill?
Well, first we need to see if the House bill, which will pass, we think, with a significant vote, can pass the Senate. I hope it will. I know there are a number of Democrats, including at least 5 that I can count who are in the path of the pipeline, plus others who've said this is important. We know the Teamsters support starting the pipeline now. We know the AFL-CIO supports starting the pipeline now. We know the environmental studies have already been done over the last 3 years. As Senator Thune pointed out, we know the energy is going to go to China if we don't get started bringing it into the United States. The time to do it is now. So I think the first thing we need to find out is whether there are the votes in the Senate to pass what the House has passed. And so I'd rather not speculate about what happens later. I'm hoping, and we're spending our time and energy trying to get this bill passed in the Senate as well as in the House.
Are you prepared to support a short-term CR to keep the government running past Friday?
Well, as Senator Alexander pointed out, we have an agreement on a minibus of a number of different appropriation bills. The only reason we're not taking that up is because apparently the Democratic members of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate have been instructed by the President and the Majority Leader not to sign the conference report. They've already agreed to it. Why don't they sign it? They've already agreed to it. This is a rarity around here. We've got a bipartisan agreement on a number of appropriation bills, and the President, presumably, in order to create some political issue, which I find difficult to understand, has instructed Democratic senators not to sign the conference report on a bill they support. You might want to ask them why they think that's a good idea.
Mr. Leader, Jay Carney was on the podium just a short hour ago saying that that agreement is not done. It may appear to be agreed to, but there are still details to be worked out. You dispute that?
Yeah, well, what was not done was the signatures. It had been agreed to before people were pulled back in, and here we are with a government shutdown pending Friday, a deal already made, and I think it's appropriate to ask the President and the Majority Leader why they want to undo a deal that was already made and threaten to shut down the government here the week before Christmas. Thank you, everyone.
Senate Republican leaders from midday today back live on the House floor. This is the motion to recommit vote on the payroll tax cut extension bill. Deadlines looming of December 31st. We'll tell you about that in just a moment. The motion to recommit offered by Representative Chris Van Hollen would provide a 3.1% payroll tax cut, an expansion beyond the Republicans' 2% cut, and it would be paid for by a surtax on millionaires. They write that it will not affect the Social Security Trust Fund, which is held harmless for the lost revenue. The bill, or the motion to recommit rather, would also prevent insider trading by members of Congress by enacting the Stock Act into law and freezing member pay. Just a few votes left on the House floor, and the final passage on the extension of Social Security payroll tax cut is next. That bill also would continue jobless benefits, but adding requirements for laid-off workers who are seeking benefits. It would block the scheduled cut for Medicare, pay cut for Medicare doctors, and give them a 1% increase. The bill would require that the President, however, make a decision within 60 days on the Keystone XL pipeline. Again, final passage vote on that is next. The Senate, meanwhile, continues debate on 2 measures to amend the U.S. Constitution. Both would be the balanced budget amendment that was required, the vote required by the deal in August on the debt ceiling, and that vote likely in the Senate tomorrow. Earlier today, we covered the Senate Agriculture Committee hearing on the collapse of MF Global, and John Corzine testifying again today. We will show all of that to you, much of it anyway, later in our schedule on C-SPAN 2, beginning at about 9 o'clock, and you can also access that online in our video library at cspan.org.
On this vote, the yeas are 183, the noes are 244. The motion is not agreed to. Question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. For what purpose? Gentleman from New Jersey rises. Gentleman asks for a recorded vote. Those in support of the request will rise. Sufficient number having arisen. A recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
And this is the final passage vote on a bill that extends the Social Security payroll tax cut. It provides some unemployment assistance, and it also prevents the scheduled cuts to Medicare payments to doctors. It calls on President Obama to make a decision on the Keystone XL pipeline within 60 days. Bill's paid for by cutting parts of the new health care law, freezing federal worker pay, and increasing fees charged by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Final passage vote, 5 minutes.